If you don't know, the brief thumbnail sketch of the bio has been studying whales in the field since the mid-1960s all over the world, and has started the Orca survey, photo identification, demographic, long-term studies continuing to this very day. If the whales go by, we may lose him. Since 1976, he has compiled the information on the population of southern residents, in particular, that has informed state and federal agencies, all the media, and all of us. That was essential to know that they were in trouble from 1995 to 2001, which was what led to their listing as endangered under the ESA in 2005. I could go on, but then again, you might say I'm biased because he's my brother. So, with that all out of the way, I will introduce Ken Balcomb. Take it away, Ken.
Thank you, Howie and Susan, for inviting me here, but I guess because I'm your brother, you sort of had to. But anyway, thanks, and thank all of you for coming, and the other speakers. I was just totally absorbed in Jim's talk. Thank you. It was wonderful. Well, I titled this No Fish, No Blackfish, because we know the blackfish, the Orcinus orca, the so-called killer whale, the orca, the southern resident community, and the northern residents, and residents, or the resident ecotype throughout the eastern North Pacific, are dependent upon salmon. And our southern residents, their population dynamics is directly linked to Chinook salmon numbers. And I'm glad you brought up the number part, because I've been focusing a lot on numbers of what it takes, like counting calories for myself too, but mostly for the whales. The Chinook salmon are very big and nutritious fish. The catch per unit effort, so far as a predator is concerned, is greatly in the predator's favor if they can catch these big ones. And the big ones are historically available year-round. And people ask why they don't eat pinks or sockeyes, and they do. They'll eat steelhead, and they'll eat bottomfish, they'll eat other stuff. But this is their main diet. They get more bang for the buck, or the catch. These fish formerly were up to 100 pounds. There were a lot of, I mean, the averages in years past were 30, 40, 50. It wasn't my average. I first came to the Northwest with my grandfather when I was 12 years old. And we helped deplete the salmon resource. We were in Nanaimo, and I think they're coho, but maybe they were little black mouse or Chinooks or whatever. But anyway, we spent 2 days fishing and caught 4 fish. And I was just so thrilled. For a little kid from New Mexico to catch a fish that size was amazing. But if I had caught fish that size, I'd have been a salmon biologist. I was hooked on little fish, and bigger fish are just like, it's incredible what these animals brought to this ecosystem. And historically, we look at, let's see if I can do this, maybe this little arrow moves around. Can anybody see that up there? Or is it? Okay, we were, before this European invasion, there were 10 to 15 million salmon returning to the rivers from Sacramento system up through about BC is about all that I'm finding good data on. And it isn't even really great data, except that we know that these numbers of fish decreased by an order of magnitude in all the river systems following the sorts of things that Jim mentioned. Dams were a biggie. This blue streak we have here was the Columbia River Chinook salmon. And now, when we began our study in the 70s, we were dealing with levels like this. They never were, you know, constant numbers. It was always fluctuations. And Mother Nature provided a flexible fish in order to deal with changes in temperatures and water conditions. Just didn't expect us to come along and make such drastic changes. But the dam constructions from 1930 to 1960s and continuing basically blocked access to the spawning habitats of these fish. So this has been expressed in the problem with fish, and Jim, I'm sure, has seen it in many of the publications and probably developed the 4 H's. Hydropower. When we put in the dams, we block them access to the habitats. And furthermore, the habitats were then degraded by the agricultural practices that used the water that was behind, and the forestry practices, and the industrial developments, chemical pollution. Then we added harvest onto that, or millions upon millions of fish were taken out and then going to be replaced by the last H, the hatcheries. And we've, Jim, you saved me a lot of words trying to explain what went on, why are hatcheries a problem. And it's just, we were taught that they were the solution, not the problem. And we could add a couple of insults here. They're environmental, fish farming, and the energy transport system that's being pushed down our throats, really, in Canada and in the United States. Fish farming, particularly in Canada, is just, I think, it'll be fun to have this panel discussion this afternoon about whether or not that's going to really sound the death knell for wild fish. Begin with the dams. This is one of the largest concrete structures on planet Earth. The Grand Coulee Dam blocking the upper reaches of the Columbia River. And it was built without any fish ladders, and it provides hydropower for all of our industries, and it provides water for all of our agriculture east of the mountains here. And that water is valuable to that agricultural complex up there. And there are a lot of pesticides and fertilizers and things that are used in that agriculture that are coming down the river and further degrading the habitat. And then, of course, this is to remind me that believe it or not, cows and stuff can mess up the habitat. And then we have the pollution that's both visible and invisible. And the most insidious of this are I think the biological mimics, the PCBs and the substances that do affect life processes that we didn't think about when we were making them, or sometimes we did if we were trying to interrupt life processes of insects, say, into pesticides. But when it gets in the organisms or the animals in the food chain, it affects their biology as well. And I think Howie mentioned earlier that there was concern that this pollution has, PCBs in particular, has spelled the death knell for the eastern Atlantic killer whale population. The predators accumulate over many meals the toxins that are in the prey. Another one of the habitat issues that we've seen around here, the forestry practices. This is the Columbia River Bridalveil Falls Timber Company back in the 1910, I think. But it went on. It's still going on. I was stationed when I was in the Navy out at Pacific Beach, Washington, and I was just amazed that logging operations were right down to the ocean shore and in all of the river systems there. I mean, just right down to the water. They just removed everything. You can actually see a little river up in the background of this valley trying to make it down through the clogged woods that are dead trees. And also when we began the study, there were, every day from May to October, there were upwards and usually 70 or more seiners on the west side of San Juan Island. And I was wondering, how can all this be going on and still have food for, I mean, I knew that the whales ate salmon, but somehow they didn't seem to mind that they just swam around the seiners and kept going up to Boundary Pass and up to the Fraser River and then back out the next day, and then twice a month they'd come down to the Puget Sound, Seattle area. And everywhere we followed them around, we saw this kind of stuff. I mean, these are big fish. These are 40-pound kings, and they were, the fishermen knew where they gathered and where they were susceptible to catch. So this went on, and you know, I wonder now if I should have raised my voice at the time or about the forestry practices. I'm actually kind of introverted. It's scary to even be in here, but the Puget Sound Chinook stocks, for example, this is just fishery statistics that you get from Pacific Fisheries Management Council. I just love their website. You can actually get access to data, and it's all those numbers. And supposedly we're going to get all wrapped up in numbers and forget about ecosystems, I guess. But whatever, I was wrapped up in numbers for numbers of fish that it took to feed whales. How come it jumped? I'll go back one. Yeah, so we had upwards of 550,000 Chinook taken out of Puget Sound every year, by about half by commercial and half by recreational fishermen. And then over the years, in the mid-90s, this was down to a couple 100,000 total. And that included then the escapements. So, you know, we'd reduced the number of fish that were available to the whales, and I think the whales just stopped going to Puget Sound in the summer months. I used to think they liked seafare, because they were down there every seafare. Even if there were thousands and thousands of boats going zigzag all over the water, the whales were just going right on through, and they'd go down around Vashon, come up through Covell's Passage, do the same thing they're pretty much doing now. But they did it twice a month and every seafair for 8 years. And so I usually planned to see some of seafair every year. And it was fun because we'd go through all the boats and we would ask people, you seen any whales lately? And most of them answered no, they hadn't seen them. The whales were spread and doing their foraging thing through the area, but you know, really you just had to pay attention a little bit and you could actually see them. But nobody was really interested at the time. In fact, some people would say, what good are they? And I'd try and make up a reason. Anyway, so now I'm looking at a total run size of Puget Sound Chinook at just sort of the last end of that previous graph. And this is the in-river run size, the ones that actually made it. And we had upwards of, what is small numbers here now. Well, anyway, a couple 100,000 fish. And that's about, it could be a couple of months' diet if they ate all of them. But they're not going to eat all of them, and they never have, otherwise there wouldn't be any fish left. But they will eat about, the southern resident population, by my calculations, will take about 580,000 20-pound Chinook a year. You know, they'll find them somewhere. If they have to go to California, they'll find them. If they have to go up to southeast Alaska. But the further north they get, the more competition from other salmon-eating whales. So basically we're looking at having to feed these whales from our Pacific Northwest here south to California. And somewhere coming up with 500,000 or 600,000 extra fish each year to feed them. And here I put the graph of Puget Sound and tried to color code the dots with the relative size of the number of fish available in the different river systems of Puget Sound. It looks to me like we've got to do a little work up here in just east of Whidbey Island here, bring some more salmon in that area. If anybody here is colorblind, I'm sorry for putting color things up there. I've had a long thing prepared, all with colors and arrows and stuff for a friend of mine, and it turned out he was colorblind. We also had the recreational catches, the one number that I could get on a 1983 report from Washington Department of Fisheries of the magnitude of the fish that were caught in British Columbia, or in Georgia Strait, really. And these are in thousands of fish, so, you know, 287,000, 272,000. So again, that's maybe a couple of months of food supply if they ate the equivalent of what the fishermen were catching. And then I got this little cute footnote here at the end where it turns out that the Canadian Department of Fisheries and Oceans subsequently said that, oh, the catch was actually about twice that. Incidentally, the numbers that you see here are what were reported, and they haven't changed them, but they said, well, yeah, there's really actually twice as many fish caught. From the Sacramento River to the Fraser River, I've color-coded the way from Pacific Fisheries Management Council, the in-river run size, which includes the in-river catch and the escapement numbers. So you can see that the numbers of fish over the years vary quite a bit, and we see that we did have a period here on my arrow. The California Central Valley stocks were doing pretty good for a few years, and that was when our whales started going south down to Sacramento River. They weren't going. We saw them every month in the 76 to 82. They weren't going to California and back. They were pretty happy up here in the Northwest. But then when more fish became available in the Sacramento system, they headed down that way. And then the coastal catch, here again, these things go up, oh, I meant to say the numbers. We were up around 3.5 million total fish in the ecosystem in really good years, returning to the rivers. And then on the coast, we were catching up to 3 million more before they got to the rivers. And that varied over the years, and again, you see the colors here, the California system here, and you can see a little bit of arrow there, but anyway, there were good years and there were bad years, and then this little valley here is, I think, regulatory primarily. I mean, they just had to close the fishery because everything was going to hell in a handbasket here on the coast. And you add these two together, you can take the years, take the ocean catch and then the river catches, and then you come up with this very complex thing that Jane Cogan put together, one of our neighbors who's a retired Boeing engineer, and she just loves to deal with data stuff. Says, oh, here, I figured it out. But we see that the different river systems sometimes contribute in different years a different proportion of the total numbers of fish available. Now this is pretty much, you know, in the big years you'd had 6 million fish, 4 million fish, and when you talk about a predator that eats 580,000 as an annual food budget, there was enough available somewhere, but they had to move according to where it was. I like graphic stuff because when I sit there and look at whole tables full of numbers, it just doesn't leap out at me as much as seeing the graphics. And we did see, I meant to say on this thing, the little blue column up at the top, that's the number of deaths that we would have in a year of the southern resident whales. And we can see that this is where we see that the population is really controlled by mortalities, and that in the years in which the fish numbers were depressed, we had higher, there's usually a lag of a little time, but a higher number of deaths. So this is where we get this correlation. Yeah, sure, it's okay if they eat other stuff, but if their survival is linked so closely to the Chinook cycles, that's really where we should spend a lot of our thinking and energy repairing that ecological problem. And this doesn't even count the neonate mortalities, the young whales that we never get to see. There's probably 40% of the births never survive. In good years, with lots of fish available, and the mothers have plenty of energy and can lactate completely, then the survival is better on the young ones. But on the average, it's about a 40% mortality. Let's see if, I think this, yes. These complex things here, let me walk over here just a little bit. Well, I guess if I walk over, then you can't hear me. We put all this fish stuff together with the top line. I don't have to, I can point with this. This is the southern resident population beginning in '76 when we started studying. There were 70 whales. It went up to almost 100, and then it decreased. There was a slight lag when we had fewer fish available, the decrease in the population. And then we had an increase in fish population. The whales went back up a bit, and now they're going back down. This second line here is LPOD, and LPOD is really the primary driver of this demographic for southern resident killer whales. The J and K pods have been pretty stable over the years, so we're really looking at the pod that is the largest, which is also running across the biggest problem when prey resources are limited. So I'm just taking a simple-minded approach here that if we have, the bottom line is 580,000 fish required to sustain the population. The in-river runs should be managed such that we avoid these valleys and we stay somewhere above 3.5 million total fish on the west coast. And that doesn't allow for any human harvest, but just to feed the whales. If we want a recovery population, we ought to allow 1 million fish, so that means, what do we have here? The biggest number. this is too small and that's too far for me to read. So, but anyway, millions and millions of Chinook salmon in this whole West Coast ecosystem. If we want to have a recovered population, way more than what we've currently got. So we can look locally here. Incidentally, I stole now a lot of these slides from people's websites. So if it's your website, I credit you. If I make a mistake, you can blame me. But basically, here we're looking at the Puget Sound system with all the river systems that are in there. If you live near one of these habitat regions, do your best and inform yourself to recover the wild salmonids in that ecosystem. And if we're all successful, we can maybe get the whales to come back to Puget Sound twice a month. And seafair will probably still be going, so there'll be lots of entertainment. We've looked at the dam situation, and there's lots of money being spent on trying to have the cake and eat it too. You know, let's have the dams and the ecosystem. And the Canadians did make a wise choice years ago when you say, well, you can't really have both. You know, you have to make a decision, choose. But if you're looking into this thing, there are some websites. I think this is salmonrecovery.gov, and you can click on it, and I've spent, I think, 2 days exploring the Columbia system. You can just mouse through and click on and see pictures and get data from all of these 208 dams that are in that system. The number itself was kind of boggling for me. I didn't know there were that many dams in the Columbia system, and that's only one of the systems. There's the California system, you know, there's dams up and down the Oregon coast and Washington coast, BC. They do have dams, even though they didn't dam the Fraser. And then, as Jim pointed out, the mitigation for these has been pretty much industrial, and now they're looking at, you know, what, so you have a hatchery upriver of the dam and downriver. The smolts that are released upriver, or the fry, that come down and go through turbines or through spillways, and there's a mortality involved. And if you do this 6 or 8 times further up the river, you don't, you know, basically your mitigation efforts are just compounded and become very expensive. I like this one, the Elwha. This man was carrying one of the Elwha fish before the dam system was put in over there. And we know that that was a big producer of Chinook in the area. And I think that all of our energies and thoughts should be with restoring that ecosystem, the Elwha ecosystem. The dams have now been taken out. This Glennis Canyon and the bottom one down here. I've hiked around it. I think we're going to have a movie about it. I think just all the support we can get to the natural recovery of that system is where we have to put our efforts. And then we'll end up with another big circle of fish here that'll draw in southern resident killer whales in this area. Hatcheries, I'm going to skip over this pretty quickly because I think Jim brilliantly covered the problem there, but there you see it. There's hatcheries all over that system, and it's basically an industrial approach that hasn't worked. Nonetheless, about 80% of the fish that are now produced, even though the total number's less, 80% of them are from these hatcheries. And this is kind of what it looks like from the ground. It does look industrial. And I'm going to skip over this one because this is a bunch of words that were actually in a government document about why hatcheries are a problem. Jim has just very nicely pointed out, and in our panel later on, I'm sure we'll have more questions about how are we going to proceed from here. I wanted to look just briefly into salmon. We know their life cycle, spawn in the rivers, the fry come down the rivers, smolt into the ocean, spend up to 6 years out there, and then back to the river and spawn and die. This is the life cycle, and the up to 6 years spent in the ocean. Most of them come back as 3- and 4-year-olds, and they're the ones that mostly are eaten by the whales as well. The diet composition that we've been able to determine from scale samples and fecal samples and so on are primarily 3- and 4-year-old fish. These salmon habitats throughout the west coast here, if it's in red, it's extinct. If it's in pink, it's threatened, endangered, and if it's endangered anyway, and then yellowish, it's threatened, and some are okay. And if we look, we'll see that primarily up in the higher latitudes of Alaska and northern BC, we just haven't messed it up as much there as we have down here. And then I drew in the range of the southern resident killer whales. I'll just do the U.S. side right now here. Primarily, they're right along the coast, and this is where the Chinook are. If we take the seasons of the year, in the winter we don't have that much productivity along the coast. In the spring we have more where it is highlight in reddish or more yellowish. There's great phytoplankton production, and then you get the zooplanktons come along and eat them, and the larval crabs and so on that the salmon eat. This is the food supply for the salmon, and it's primarily right along the coast. And then we have, in the autumn, most of the salmon that we're talking about by then are coming back to the rivers, and they're available in this core area for the whales to eat. We have a ocean current system here that favors upwelling along this coast, and the upwelling brings up cold, nutrient-rich waters, and the sunlight of the summer produces the productivity. There's nothing we can do about this ocean current system. It's just the way it is. And there is a PDO, or a Pacific Decadal Oscillation. When you have the warm reddish years, you have less productivity, and when you have the cold bluish years, you have more productivity. And that's because the cold waters bring in the lipid-rich copepods from the higher latitudes, and that is the basic bottom of the food chain for the vertebrate system. I was going to go along. I think I'm going to truncate this a little bit, but we've got two kinds, just like we have transient and resident ecotype killer whales, or residents. Transient and resident ecotypes in this area. We also have so-called river Chinook and ocean Chinook in this area. And the river Chinook spend maybe a year or so in the river systems, estuaries, and then they bolt and go way out on the North Pacific Ocean. Whereas the ocean type, as soon as they come down the rivers, they just head out and they feed along the coast and in the nearshore ecosystems. this I took out of a book on Chinook that showed the different types, and basically the river types are out in the high seas here and not available to our whales. It's the ocean types that are along the coast. Take that, and I just drew these little red dots. This is where our whales are feeding, is coastally. And this is where the productivity is. Just really very near shore. Some years ago, I said, well, why don't we just do a sighting system all the way down the coast? I'll run out and put out posters, and Howie and Susan will answer the phone. And, we'll see who sees whales. And as a result of this, we had about 7,000 sighting reports. I put up posters in each one of these little, this is just 1 year's worth of, I put up a GPS position and a poster, and I'd see whether or not we had cell phone coverage, and I'd see whether or not we could see very far out on the ocean from that location. And then this is sort of what we got back, the sightings that were over the years right along the coast. And I surmised that, well, these people, most of the sightings are from people ashore. So I figured that, well, the whales are not going that far out. You know, if they're within 6 miles and I have a good lookout, I could just go down the coast and find them. Sure. Yeah, good idea. But, you know, and I actually did this a few times. I get the sighting reports, and they were off the coast of Oregon heading south. I'd zoom down to California and meet them and take pictures and see who was there. And that was, I thought, kind of fun and remarkable that we could actually kind of predict. They'll go 75 to 100 miles a day. I could say, well, the next afternoon they're going to be there. And J-pod, I figured on the basis of the sightings that we had, they didn't go very far down the coast. The furthest sighting we had was Newport, Oregon. But they spent a lot of time messing around up here in the Boundary area and Georgia Strait, Puget Sound, out the Strait of Juan Fuca, turn around and come back in. K-pod, we know, was going as far as Monterey Bay. And last year, with one satellite tagged, I just followed him along with a laptop, with an iPad actually, and an iPhone, and I'd get my cell coverage and you'd see where K-25 was, and I'd go 20 miles ahead and set up on a bluff and watch for him. And he'd come by, and if I had friends in the area that had boats and nets, I'd say, you know, JJ, go out and, you know, he's 3 miles north of you. He's coming your way, you know, and it's rough as hell out there. He's not having a good time at all. But, I'm just sitting there on the beach, you know, just be patient. Then I get a visual on him, and I'd say, JJ, he's just over that crest of that wave. Just go over there. And Cal Fish and Game, I'm sure, is angry with me because they took their boat out there and just about everybody died. Winter studies are not easy, but the fact is that you know, we can do it. I mean, we can get out there, and maybe it's a horrible day or foggy or something. You can't do it today, but keep trying. Tomorrow you can. And what we're coming up with is that they're eating largely salmonids and Chinook out on the coast as well. Anyway, and then we add L-pod to the thing. We see that coast just light up. This is their habitat. And of course we knew that 25 years ago. We published this little chart, but we didn't really have the data. I figured that given the time that it takes between sightings, my sightings even, you know, it's only maybe 12, 14 days. They couldn't have gone very far, a round trip of, say, 1,200 miles. So they didn't go all the way to California and back, or Alaska and back. They came back. Anyway, recently there's been a petition to include that coastal area in the critical habitat. It'll be interesting to have a discussion this afternoon about that. Well, you know, these are the problems that we're facing right now, but I don't know whether or not it's still the demographic trend, but the population is increasing in here, and we're going to have maybe 100 million people in this corridor called Sevan and Port Jean. I mean, you can go down between Portland and Eugene now and see new Walmarts and Costco's and, you know, all kinds of stuff happening. The same thing is happening north of us here. I mean, it's just filling in. And when we have, you know, 2 to 5 times as many people here, we're going to have that, you know, it's going to magnify this issue. We have to kind of be in a hurry to fix things up and then get all the folks that are coming in. Most of this increase is immigration. And they're going to have different values and different histories, and we have to train them. We have to teach them that, you know, that these salmon are important. These whales are important. We got to keep this whole thing alive somehow. The whole planet is actually in human hands in a way here. And as you notice, I stretched it out here. It's getting flatter. Pretty soon we'll have a flat Earth again. We can do this all over. But if we do it all over, let's learn from the past here and not industrialize everything. You know, nature isn't going to keep the planet going if we flatten it out. Anyway, so the real big challenge, I think, for all of us here now is, you know, educate ourselves as much as possible and then spread what you've learned. And I think what Jim has learned through a career of fish biology is, I mean, like I say, if I'd caught one of those big fish, that's probably what I'd be doing, is going through that system. In fact, the first job I was offered when I got out of college was working at a fish hatchery, because I was in fish and wildlife management. And I wonder how different I would have been if I'd gone that route than the whale route. You know, the second job I was offered was a dishwasher on a whale catcher boat. So I took that one. It sounded pretty interesting, and it was. Well, thank you all much. The fish are